Last question. What tips can you share about traveling with a teen with selective mutism? I'm most concerned about traveling through busy airports, going through security, and then also taking public transportation. So I guess like trains or buses.
Right. Well, first of all, I would never have anyone that is mute in a social situation and cannot speak up for themselves to be out and about on public transportation, even driving a car, unless they have the ability to answer a question. You can certainly prepare non-verbally and have like non-verbal means of sharing that it's difficult for me to speak and so forth. And that we can definitely talk about. But first of all, preparation is critical. You're talking about a teen here. So this is somebody that's not 3 or 4, but somebody old enough to understand, hey, we're going to be traveling. Preparing that child for what's going to be happening in the travel. Are you going onto an airport, as you said here, going through TSA, having to answer some basic questions, being prepared for that? We do something called action plans. Action plans are when we kind of outline the social communication encounter. And what that means is who's going to be there, what can they ask, what is your answer, and what could you ask in that scenario? Now, based on their stage of comfort and what we're working on, either a parent brings them in, maybe it's nonverbal and they just show the answers. Maybe they can answer, maybe it's scripted. So again, I need to know this where this teen is in terms of social communication because as you know, I see it as a bridge. I don't see it as speaking or not, but respecting where they are. And when you're going through TSA, that's not where you're really working on next steps and progressing them across the bridge. You're allowing them to just get through that situation. I will say that when going through an airport, you do want to have some sort of letter that you can provide to TSA that's signed by your treatment professional that says, hey, my child has selective mutism. It's difficult. If this is an anxiety disorder, he may not be able to answer you. So therefore, either ask me or he's able to respond either non-verbally or through gesturing. We do have letters that we provide to our families to help them with that. And if one of the listeners is listening, we certainly can help provide some sort of letter that is a generic letter that we can give to individuals. So they just need to email. They can email support@selectivemutismcenter.org, and we will be happy to provide that TSA letter. We will actually include that as one of the resources as well. When we're going through whatever, going to a hotel, that's an action plan. Who's going to be there? The gentleman or the woman behind the desk. They're going to ask questions. What can they ask? What are their answers? So, yes, we can work on our next steps by planning ahead as to what questions are going to be asked, rehearsing those questions and answers, and then coming up with questions you may need to ask. Working on frontline, handover, takeover, really working the skills when we're out and about in these kind of vacation or traveling situations. I only mentioned TSA to minimize that because of the stress of going through the airport. That may not be where you want to kind of work on everything. However, when you're out in a restaurant or in a store or at the hotel, when you're going on public transportation, these are areas that you may want to work through. But again, I wouldn't have my child going on public transportation unless they can speak or at least have a recording of something. I just would not be comfortable with that. But the more you can prepare for out and about, help your team be ready for it, to encounter different social communication opportunities and see those as areas to practice, that's what my recommendation would be.
I wanted to go back to one of the things you said in the very beginning about not having this teen out and about by themselves. What happens when a teen with selective mutism turns 16 or 17 or 18 and they get their license? What does that look like in terms of letting them kind of go, drive around and do whatever they want to do? Because if they're having trouble talking to strangers, you know, that's that could be an issue, right? So what happens in that scenario?
So I want to back up for a second. That's a really good point because I get asked this again often about driving, and I have had parents be okay with their children getting their license when they are completely mute. and they will put like a note in on their phone, or so they'll have a note in their notepad, the child, the teenager, or a note in their glove box and so forth. I personally am not comfortable with that. I tell my families it's this is an area to motivate the teen to work on strategies and interventions, because one of the most common comments I get from parents is my teen is just not motivated. She just doesn't seem to want to work on her goals. I don't know what to do to help my child do these things because nothing really motivates them. And I tell families there's always something that will motivate them. And as teens start to get into that driving range, more teens than not, I'm not saying all teens, but more teens than not will want to drive. Their peers are starting to drive, especially if they have friends. So this becomes a motivation. It's not a punishment that we're not having them get their license. It's a motivation. And it's also a safety issue. I've had so many situations over the course of time where kids have driven, and literally this was just 2 weeks ago, where a child was driving. She was driving from one place to the next. She got a flat tire
Right.
and went
And
on
what
the
then?
side.
Then what does she do?
She tried to call her parent, nobody answered. Eventually, someone came over to her on the side of the road and she couldn't talk. And she literally panicked. So I'd want to work through emergency situations. And that family did not have an emergency situation intact. The child is now terrified to ever drive again. So you can imagine that was a traumatic experience for that child. So, more times than not, it's not advantageous to be a driver of a vehicle, just like taking public transportation if you are completely mute, in case there are scenarios that you need to be able to deal with in an emergency situation. And if it requires your voice, then I wouldn't be putting that child in that situation until they have reached a point that we feel safe that they could get through an emergency situation.
Right. So you almost use getting their license as leverage. They can't get it
Well,
unless they can work on their
yeah,
goals.
and I
And
right, and I don't want it to be seen negatively. It's not, you can't get your license unless you talk. That's not the message I'm giving that child. The message is, listen, to be able to drive, you need to be able to speak up if something happens. You need to be able to have a way to communicate. If God forbid something happens, you get in an accident, you don't feel good, you have pain, you need to reach out to somebody, a policeman asks you or a policewoman asks you questions, you need to be able to communicate back. And what if you get lost? What if you get a flat tire? I mean, there's a lot of unfortunate situations. What if you get in a car accident? Again, I've had that happen. And therefore, that's the language we use, is that we want to be able to help you feel safe. I mean, we don't rattle through every emergency, but we say that you need to be able to have a way to communicate so that if something did happen, you were able to communicate your needs, because we can't just enable their lack of social communication. We need to help them if they have the ability to be able to use their words eventually. And that's just a fact. If they're not using their words, I don't feel safe with kids driving cars on their own, because I feel like that could be a problem. So it's
yeah,
said in more of a matter of fact way, Brandon, rather than if you don't speak, you can't drive way. Do you see what I mean? It's
right.
like, hey, we know you want to drive. Let's work together to make that happen. And this is why we're working on our social communication, so that you can drive, so that you can take a plane across the country to see your friends, so that you can go on public transportation if that's what you want when you're on vacation. Like, so that you can go to the Phillies game and get your tickets at will call, whatever that might be. It's about helping them reach their potential and kind of guiding them in a coach like manner, rather than in a disciplinarian, if you don't do this, you're not going to get that. That's never how I talk to kids. It's about working with them closely and helping them realize why they need to work on this. And we're going to start at a stage and a step that's comfortable for them. This is why when I work with any age individual, I always use their feelings, whether it's a 0 to 3 with younger kids or a 0 to 5 with older kids, where 5 is the hardest or scariest and 0 is the easiest. And I trust them when I ask them. I don't not believe them. I trust them. And because we've done an evaluation and we understand them, I kind of know how they're feeling in these situations. So we can help guide them to the next step in a safe way, where they're not feeling over the top anxious, but it's in a way that helps them feel safe and there's trust.